Hi, I'd like to welcome you to the 27th chapter of the Idaho Writers Journal. I am your host, Kristen Fletcher, and with me today is Chuck Guilford, professor at Boise State University. I'd like to welcome you very much today, Chuck.
Thanks, Kristen. It's really nice to be here in Pocatello.
Yeah. Chuck joined us last night at the Rocky Mountain Writers Festival, and that was the first time I'd had a chance to hear you read, and you have a new book out called What Counts. Where did that title come from?
That's a good question. I think that there are a couple of ways of looking at it. I guess I kind of got to, there's a poem in there called What Counts, which I could read it and it might give you an idea, but I think that, and really, I think I started writing the poem, and then I was got the poem written, and I thought, well, now I got to figure out what to title this thing. What am I going to call this poem? And so I started looking at the poem, and I started thinking that maybe the poem was sort of an attempt to figure out what counts in life, what counts, what matters to me, and then I started to thinking, how do we determine, how do we know what matters to us in life? We have all of these different claims on our attention, all of these different forces pushing us and pulling us, telling believe this and buy that, and
this.
Stand up, fight for something else, and various kinds of issues like that. And somehow we have to sort this process out and say, where does family fit into this? Where does the environment or the natural world fit into this? Where do creature come first? How much does fun count in making sense of your life and figuring out who you are and what you are? And not that any of that really gets into the poem, but I guess that was kind of what it was about, is that this is something that kind of matters, is to figure out what counts in our life and to set some priorities and values a little bit.
So this whole book that Limberlost Press just produced is an exploration of that?
In some ways, and again, just partly it was a practical consideration. I mean, it comes time and you get the book and you're thinking, okay, now what am I going to call this crazy?
So you're one of those people that writes first and then gets the title instead of getting the title first and then writing?
Not always, but generally speaking, I start writing because I have, sometimes what happens, I guess the way I said generally, because sometimes it'll be a phrase or some words or something like that that'll be kind of playing around in my head, and so I'll just begin with those, and other words will come, rhythm, and I'll begin to sense that, okay, that this gets me into an idea, and I keep working with that. And so maybe it does maybe the original words that I started with might well turn out to be the title, in a sense. So sometimes it will happen that way, but other times it's only afterward that I start looking and trying to figure out what it was that I was doing, what is this thing about that I have written, and that was kind of what happened here. I got the book, and I had the poems, and Rick Ardinger, who's my publisher, he and I sat down thinking about, well, what are we going to call this book, Chuck? And I'm thinking, well, how about this? And we talked about a couple of different possible titles, and we could, no, that one. And What Counts did sort of seem to symbolize it. One of the thoughts that I've had about this is that I think also that there is, I've come to feel that many years ago, I used to read a lot of existentialist philosophy, people like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, and one of the things that I remember about that was that they would talk about the responsibility to choose, that what is important in life is not something that is predetermined by other people. It's not something that's predetermined by the media. It's not something that's woven into the fabric of existence that we have to figure out for ourselves so much, is that it's something that we choose, and it's something that we determine. We determine what matters to ourselves in life. We determine what kind of a world we want to live in, and we take responsibility for the consequences of those choices. We live with the results of those choices. We define who we are and what the world, really in a way define what the world is about by how we answer questions of what counts for us, and to some extent. And so I think I had that kind of in mind. I thought, well, that was out of all the poems in the book, and I thought it's an easy way to title a book, is to just, instead of
Pick
coming up
one.
with a whole new title, you pick a poem, you've already got a title in there, you just pick one of those and make it the title.
Well, you know that you're going to have to read this poem now. It's just
I hope I
inevitable.
haven't built it up very much, because it's just, yeah, maybe I should. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The poem is, here, got it, and I can find it pretty quick, I think. And, yeah, it's kind of about walking to, it starts out, it's just about walking to school, mainly. And when I walk to school, I walk through a park and along the river, and so the poem's about walking down a path to school. And then kind of thinking about some of the ideas that, because it's a peaceful, quiet time a lot of times, and it's time for a little reflection, and it's kind of just following the thoughts in my mind as I walk along the path on the way to school. Okay? So it's called What Counts. How long until the gray-brown grass I walk across each morning on my way from home to work begins to speak? Surely these small bent blades on the ragged path's edge don't know or care how far I push them back. And if they don't, then why should I? Why should I trouble myself or anyone else if plum blossoms fall? Or is it maybe seeing, maybe caring makes it matter? Maybe hands as strong as yours were made for holding whatever you love and care for as close as you can. Anyway, that's that poem.
Oh, that's lovely. I just came back from Boise, actually Thursday, and walked on the Greenway Path. And
Okay.
it's a beautiful place. You know, seeing herons and kingfishers and
Yeah.
children playing and ducks and geese, and it's a wonderful place.
Yeah, it is, but you know, it's also a really violent place, and that's a kind of a funny thing, and it's kind of a sad thing.
Violence in terms of crime.
Yeah, there is a lot of crime down there, a lot of brutality, and a lot of people will say, you know, don't walk down in the greenbelt alone, especially if you're a woman. That's not something that's in a lot of the publicity about.
No, the Tourist Council probably would edit that line out.
Yeah, it's the other side of it. But it is a beautiful place also, but it's kind of an indeterminate place. And I guess maybe the reason I bring that up is not to, you know, bring out the dark side of life necessarily,
But to look at that
it's
other
kind
part
of a
of it.
place of, it is kind of a place of what we make of it. I mean, and that's kind of what I mean about the world. We choose what kind of world we're going to live in. We can choose to live in a world of barbarity and destruction and pain, or we can choose to live in a world of beauty and happiness, and these are our choices. These are our decisions about what kind of a world we want to build. What do we value in life? What do we care about? What do we love? And what kind of a world do we want to have for ourselves? And in its own humble little way, I think that's the kind of issue that I'm trying to address to some extent.
Could you read that line again about, it was somewhere either just before or just after that part where you said your strong hands, and something about your strong hands and caring.
Yeah, maybe hands as strong as yours were made for holding.
We're made for holding.
Whatever you love and care for, as close as you can. I got to thinking there about the, and then the lines before that, or is it maybe seeing, maybe caring makes it matter?
Caring makes it matter.
You know, I think that again, it's part like this existential idea to some extent, that in a sense, everything is nothing. I mean, that's the idea of absurdism or absurdity. We go off and we slaughter people and destroy villages, or we pollute the planet to build a skyscraper, or, you know, like Joni Mitchell said, you pave paradise and put up a parking lot. What's more important, the paradise or the parking lot? Well, some people choose the parking lot. Some people choose paradise. And what I'm trying to get at is there's no fundamental standard that we can say that
that
a
here's,
parking
here's
lot
the
is
line,
better
and this
than a
is right
paradise.
and that's wrong,
Yeah,
right.
you know, that
Yeah.
we make those choices and we live with the consequences and the implications of our choices. And it's good to sort out our priorities and good to sort out our feelings. Who cares if I trample a bunch of dead brown grass as I walk along the path? The grass doesn't feel it. The grass doesn't care. Nobody's going to see this, but maybe I decide that it's important not to trample the grass. So anyway, and so each of us has the capacity to sort out our values and our priorities and to decide what we love and what matters to us and to hold it fast in a world that is constantly changing, in a world that is continually disappearing in front of us as fast as we see it, you know, whatever the aging process, the time it's so.
You know, before the program started, we were visiting a little bit, and you shared with me that you're from Michigan,
Right.
and that you live in Idaho now, over in Boise, and for some period of time, 10, 20 years, something like that, I guess. But you were talking about dwelling, you know, this exploration you have, or you're participating in, about living in place. And I wonder if either you have a piece that might kind of talk about that, and or how this idea of what counts relates to the idea of dwelling, of being home in a place.
Yeah, and I have maybe a couple of them like that. One of them is maybe one of those ones that I read last night, which would be that the one I'm thinking of here is that archaeology of the Trout Creek Mountains, and that's a little bit about that kind of an idea. Not that I live in the Trout Creek Mountains, I don't at all, but the Trout Creek Mountains are it's a range of mountains in southeast Oregon near the Nevada border, kind of in the area of south of French Glen and Harney County area, basically. It's a desert area, and what I tried to do in that poem was to go back and to look at the history of the region. I'm having a little trouble finding. Oh, there it is. Finding the poem, but I wanted to give a sense in the poem of what that area is like, and some of the different cultures and peoples who have lived in the area, how they respond to the area, how it is, how it's changed over a long period of time, and to give a little bit of a sense of the natural environment that we move into so quickly and easily. I mean, we can come into it very fast with our cars and our motor homes, and we stay a while either at a campsite, or maybe we, you know, build a home there, and we rip up the side of a mountain to put down our homes. And well, people need places to live, and there are a lot of people in the world, and they want to have places to live. But I thought, you know, to dwell in a place, it's nice to think a little bit about what kind of a place is this? What was this place like 100 years ago? What was it like 200 years ago? What was it like 400 years ago? What was it like 1,000 years ago? And what does our life that we live, that what we bring to it, how does it integrate with what's already here? And how can we, to some extent, maybe fit in, appreciate and understand what was here, and fit in with what's here, and live in harmony and at peace to some extent with the environment that's here, rather than sort of just say, oh, well, let's cut that down, or let's move this out of the way, and something like that. So. Anyway, this is called Archaeology of the Trout Creek Mountains. And it's really a series of, it's intended to give the feeling of notes in a notebook taken for an archaeology lesson or something.
Kind of like a field notes.
Yeah, kind of like field notes. Yeah, that's the feeling I want to get to it. Archaeology of the Trout Creek Mountains. Big sage, low sage, greasewood, velvet ants, wild rye and fescue, stone tools, rock art, small lithic scatters, grinding tools down in the lowland flats, uplands, rock shelter, hunting and toolstone, obsidian higher, Whitehorse obsidian, Cold Dwellers, Red Butte Dwellers, 2 bands of northern Paiute, may have come from the south. Followed herds of large animals, mastodon, bison, western pluvial lakes, lake margins, waterfowl, fish of the Trout Creek Mountains, red band, Lahontan, willow whitehorse cutthroat. Maybe 7,000 years ago, lakes shrunk, seasonal settlements, settled near springs. 2,000 years later, Whitehorse Creek, side-notched projectile points, more wintertime food storage, hunted deer and bighorn sheep, had created sustainable lifeway. 1860s, Snake Indian War, no more rock art, cash economy, sheep, cattle, horses. Horses hunted to extinction, then reintroduced. Food produced elsewhere, shipped here and sold. Rattlesnake, bluebell, mule deer, watercress, pronghorn, wild iris, bottletop, magpie.
I'm so glad you read that again. I really like that a lot. You know, as you were reading it, I was, of course, listening and also reflecting on what we had talked about walking along the Greenway and how there are all these hidden worlds. You know, if you're there at night and you're a single woman, the world is, or potentially is, a scary, violent place as you walk along the Greenway. If you walk there by the light of day and the kids are playing and the dogs are romping, it's a wonderful, blissful kind of place. And yet those two places are the same place. And as you were reading this, I suddenly heard it in a different way than I heard it last night. Yes, because so many of the things you wrote about were about sort of like violence and change, projectile points, you know, bison, you know, the layering, the coming, the going, the losing, the lasting of things.
Yeah, okay.
And I just suddenly, it was like it was the same thing kind of in this philosophical kind of way as walking along the Greenway and seeing those two worlds that are transparent to one another. As it was over this long span of geological time.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Well, it was.
Well, thanks. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I don't think I really did that intentionally. I was thinking, wow, yeah. But I don't think I did. But I was exploring the
watching
texture
it pass
of the
over
culture.
time.
Sure,
Yes.
Yeah.
And violent wars, the wars of the 1860s, and the cash economy suddenly thrust upon a people that had no concept of what cash was.
Right.
I mean, cash was this thing, and I have this thing, and we could trade, and I'll give you 2 of these, and yeah.
Well, thanks. I guess that part of it, I was thinking about consciously, but also just the way. I partly wanted to give a sense of the way in which time moves so at its own pace, and it moves kind of over these vast geological spans, and yet there's a certain continuity to it all with the vegetation, the big sage, low sage, greasewood, wild rye, and fescue, these things that have been here for eons. Really, and then yeah, and then
10 to 15,000 years is what my botanist friends tell me.
Yeah, and so
waxing and waning. I mean, sometimes more of them and sometimes less of them, and yeah.
And then all of a sudden, with the coming of civilization, how fast it all changes, how the process accelerates so rapidly, and how we're forced to make a lot of really rapid adjustments and the environment is forced to make some rapid adjustments that maybe it isn't accustomed to these species, and their interrelationships have been evolving and co-evolving really for thousands of years, and then all of a sudden something happens that is such a shock that to the ecology that these the forces that have been here, the communities, the native communities that have been here, just can't really. There's no way that they can adapt to these changes in the amount of time that's available to them, and so you get a lot of times a lot of dislocation. I think that's happening.
I'm very involved with the Idaho Native Plant Society,
Oh,
so
I
I
see,
was
sure.
incredibly impressed that you knew Great Basin wild rye and fescue and big and low sagebrush and greasewood. And so do you have a naturalist bent as well, or I mean, do you come to these places knowing these things, or do you write about a place and then say, now what were those, it looked like there were two kinds of sagebrush, I wonder what they were, and then do research.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Well, no, this one was, in this particular poem, I am interested in that kind of thing, but this particular poem was done with a combination of actual field notes from a hike that I took in the, I was at a conference at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. And it was called the Desert Conference, and as part of the conference, it was an exploration of the ecology of that area there around the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, and part of the conference focused on the Trout Creek Mountains. And so they had a nature hike. We went out and with a naturalist and walked up into the mountains, and he pointed out the native plant communities there, and I made notes of their names. I love the names. The names are so beautiful.
Greasewood. Who thought of greasewood?
Yeah, really.
So do you have some other poems that you'd like to share with us?
Okay, sure.
Either along this theme or totally outside what we've been talking about, or just something that you'd like to have see the light of day.
Okay. A lot of the poems are deal in one way or another with the desert and with desert air, the desert environment. I said desert air, and I guess I was thinking about the kind of the clarity of the air in the desert, and this one. Near Silent Creek is kind of along those lines. Maybe I could read that one anyway.
Please do. What's the title of it?
Near Silent Creek.
Silent Creek.
Like a single unbroken commitment to rain, this dry wash believes the earth's pull flows through stone that is bound to move. Roots beyond darkness understand that too, but not like a human mind, so much as veins remaining empty after everything is gone. The shadow of bitter brush no longer moving slowly over basalt. The vertical columns themselves collapsing inward. And yet, this flow of stone and sand could teach us that every direction we speak is an opening deeper than any story. Here's one now. A thin blue column of smoke rose slowly, then vanished in the desert air.
Oh my, that's a wonderful poem.
Well, thank you.
I really like that.
Yeah. I was trying to, kind of get the people out of there and give a sense of
Well, it's
the
like
movement of the, I don't know exactly what to call it, but
it's
natural processes, natural processes at work in a kind of a lean desert environment, erosion and gravity, and how they all kind of work together in a way that has its own logic and its own maybe meaning and purpose, but that is somehow not quite understandable to us.
And also, water is so essential in a desert, and there's so little of it.
Yeah.
And that whole, that line that you had about, you know, like veins stripped of something or other, I can't remember how you said it, but it is. I mean, they're like these veins from some higher elevation carrying this life-giving fluid to somewhere, and sometimes that somewhere is just simply down. It just goes down, and sometimes there's enough of it where it makes little streams and actually pools and lakes and ponds and oceans and whatnot. But that's a lovely poem, really lovely poem.
Thank you. Appreciate
Let's see, we've got about a little less than 5 minutes now. Is there, gosh, about 10 more that you'd like to read?
I could probably squeeze those in. There's one that I was thinking about that I might do. Had a couple of different thoughts in mind about what that might be. How about this one? A Chinese puzzle, it's called. One piece looks like a branch, or else a river, set stark against a rock or hard gray sky, or something cold that seems to be a temple. An ancient monk sits calmly by the door, his saffron robe like dancing sunlit water. He mocks your consternation with his eyes. Before you even entered, you already were confused. But now, with all these tiny lacquered pieces, you have to settle down and concentrate. Next time, you'll be more careful. That's the secret. When you think you understand, begin again. That's just like a little riddle, I guess you could say.
It seemed very riddle-like to me. It was like, I'm going to have to read that one again, I think.
Well, that's what it says. Well, here's a begin again. So I don't know. That's just a little fun with words and an attempt to sort of. Well, if I tried to explain it, I don't even think I could explain it.
Come around again, you have to explain it all over again, wouldn't you?
Do it again. It's like a little Mobius strip, you know, where do you know what those are?
No, I don't.
It's like there's a way that you can take a piece of paper and you can fold it and put a little twist in it, and it makes a little Mobius strip so that it has, the idea of it is that it's a one-sided piece of paper. A piece of paper only has one side to it because you folded it in such a way that the two different sides, original two different sides, connect and make only one side. And so you keep going around and around and around, and you keep coming back to where I can show you how to make one after this is over. I guess we don't have time now, but the poem is intended to be sort of like that, where you keep kind of going around and around in an endless loop. So.
Kind of like E.M. Escher's, kind of where his steps go down, and then they go down again, and then they go down again.
It's exactly the same idea. That's the idea of how it works. So, anyway.
Well, this has been just wonderful talking with you. It's just there's so many more poems to read and kind of explorations about dwelling here in this dry place. It's really been great. So thank you very much, Chuck, for coming and joining us.
Thanks.
Yeah. And thanks for joining us at the Idaho Writers Journal. I hope you'll tune in again. Thanks.